we as a community know that we have to care about each other regardless of our religion, our race, our politics, or whatever, because we know we're not safe if we don't. But it's hard to be in a larger context that doesn't behave that way and doesn't feel that way. And I think we do feel that we need to move the country back from where we are.
Hi, this is Frank Schaeffer, and you are watching and/or listening to my podcast, In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer. So this is a Facebook Live event, and then it's on YouTube, and all the places podcasts are put on the interwebs. So we are in conversation today with someone who I know very well, and we will be talking a lot about the journeys we took together. And this is my old friend, Kathy Roth-Douquet. And she's co-founder and CEO of Blue Star Families. Kathy is a nonprofit executive, author, commentator, strategist, and attorney of 2 books, including AWOL, which I'll talk about in a minute. And she's also, let's see, what was the other one, Kathy? My mind.
Yeah. It's How Free People Move Mountains.
Yes, that's right. Okay.
That we also did together.
Yeah. So anyway, let me cut all this stuff that I usually would read for someone I don't know as well and jump right into it. Kathy and I are very dear, old, close friends. Kathy, let's start with this. I'm trying to remember the date, not the date, but when did we first meet? I know where it was. It was, I think, at Camp Lejeune.
In Camp Lejeune in 2005, you were doing on a book tour. I had read that you were coming to speak about keeping faith, father-son journey about love in the United States Marine Corps.
Right.
I was very interested in the work you were doing because I was very interested in the topic, and I was thinking, and I was a mom. My husband was deployed. I had little kids. I was busy. I'm like, am I going to go there or not? And I'm like, we're just going to go. And you and I met. We got to talking. The kids were running around, and the book behind you came out of it.
Yeah, it did. And the thing is, at the time, just to give a little background, I was someone who had never served in the military. And when my son, John, at age 18, volunteered for the U.S. Marine Corps as enlisted.
In 1999, before that.
99. It was right out of high school. And then, of course, 9/11 happened. And then he was deployed twice in Afghanistan, once to Iraq. He and I wrote a book together that did very well called Keeping Faith, a Father-Son Story About Love in the United States Marine Corps. And a couple more books came out of that. And then I was on a book tour of bookstores and universities and colleges, and also stopping at military bases, especially Marine Corps bases. And then we met. And then during the course of our conversation there, you were talking about what you had found interesting about what I was saying, which was this kind of class difference between who volunteers and who doesn't. And I forget whether it was in that conversation itself or not, but I kind of turned around and proposed to you. I said, well, why don't we write a book together about this? Because you are a Marine Corps officer's wife, doing the Marine Corps spouse thing. I'm the Marine Corps parent.
Right.
Your husband's an officer, and my son is enlisted. You come out of a political White House background because you and your husband had met while you were working for the Clintons. Tell me a little about that.
That's right. I also, like you, had come from a non-military background. Back when you and I were growing up, after Vietnam, before 9/11, educated, cultured, sophisticated people were very, very removed from the military. They are now too, but it was even more so back then. And so, I went to graduate school. I went to undergrad, graduate school. I worked in the foundation world. I worked for President Clinton as an advanced person. Met my husband, who was the Marine One pilot for President Clinton. And we fell in love, and it was pretty shocking to people when someone from Bryn Mawr and Princeton and Shaker Heights, Ohio, married someone in the Marine Corps. And I found myself in a very different world where the people who I used to work with knew nothing about this new world, but it was, after the war. And these people were doing a very heavy lift for the country, but the people who make all the decisions about them really didn't know them. And that really worried me. And when I met you, I was writing an op-ed about it. And I said, hey, would you look at this op-ed for me and give me some pointers? And you did, and that op-ed kind of became what we collaborated on, the basis of, what spun out into this book.
Yeah, and then we started writing a book together, but we both understood each other well because we both moved in circles that didn't really understand us much.
Right.
And that is, you came from a high-powered political background with the Clintons and the kind of, I wouldn't say left wing, that's the wrong thing, but the liberal Democrat, like you say, highly educated, lawyer, all the rest of this. Your husband flies Marine One, but just like I was getting friends of mine who were saying, well, like what went wrong that your son John joined the Marine Corps out of high school instead of going to university, like your son Francis, who's at Georgetown at the School of Foreign Service, your daughter who's at NYU, that's my daughter. You were getting the same sort of reaction, I guess, from old friends, if I understood you right when we first talked. So we kind of bonded, we understood each other.
Yeah, well, absolutely. We very much understood each other. And also we loved this new community that we found. And we loved the way that it connected us to people who seemed as though they were very different from us, but it connected us to it because, and this goes to the, I think, theme of your new book, because we loved things together, and we were committed to things together. We were willing to care for things together. And that gave us a window into a very beautiful way of thinking about our purpose.
Well, and we were both a little ticked off too, in the sense that, I remember in Keeping Faith, I think I have a line in there, something to the effect that I felt closer to the garage mechanic that changed my oil, who had a Marine bumper sticker on our car, than I did to my old snooty friends, some of whom teach at Harvard and all the rest of this, because I live in the North Shore. As I put it, I think in our book or in one of my books, in the higher education worshiping Volvo driving North Shore of Boston.
Yes.
And in that community, I didn't even know anybody else who had a kid in the Marines.
Right.
So anyway, that's how we met. And then tell me a little more about how we wrote the book together. And I'm not, I'm just sort of going on a fishing expedition here because I have vivid memories, but let me get yours first, because you're supposed to be the guest here, although this is a very weird podcast because you're hardly my guest. We're old friends, but let's pretend for a minute here and tell me about writing this book with Frank Schaeffer and how we did it.
So, I tell this story to people a lot because my career got disrupted. I had a very high flying career before I married a Marine. And then this was before the internet. So, we started moving around and I lost my career. And I was taking care of my children, but I also had other things that I professionally wanted to do. You were a very non-judgmental person, Frank. So, you were very open to collaborating with me, even though I hadn't written a book before. I had, published articles, but nothing as big as that. But when I sought you out, and I don't know if I ever was as upfront with you about this, but I had this fantasy in my mind. I'm going to meet this author, I'm going to charm him, going to convince him to write a book with me. And this is going to help me write my book, which is something I wanted to do. It was like, I've got this sense of things, and there's no way to say it in a conversation, and we've got to get out there in the world, but I don't think I can do it by myself.
For me, it was the perfect timing, because I was looking for a sort of a next step, and I never had the illusion that somehow being the father of a Marine earned me a right to then become a commentator. I mean, the Marines were very nice. They were inviting me to the Marine Corps Ball and all this other stuff as a speaker because the book was successful. A lot of recruiters were using it to kind of assuage the fears of parents who were saying, well, what, my God, what my son or daughter has done here. That said, I was very aware that, hey, this is not your thing, kind of a weird excursion. And so it was a big relief for me because I felt, A, with your political background, and B, with being married to a Marine officer who was in this for career, you would kind of earn the right to speak. And so I was relieved in a way to run into someone who was tracking with what I was saying, but at the same time, even more invested than I was. Of course, the subtitle of this book, The Unexcused Absence of America's Upper Classes from Military Service and How It Hurts Our Country, was a theme that we were kind of dwelling on because of the fact that, like all our wars since World War II and the end of the draft, there was this huge issue that as soon as the draft went away, all the student protests about our wars and drafts and the use of our military kind of evaporated because it didn't bother them anymore. That, you know, the sons and daughters of essentially middle class, lower middle class, except for legacy people who were in the officer class and more normally whose fathers and grandfathers were in, went away. So that became our shtick. That was what the book was about.
At two sides of it. It was both that we don't properly steer and care for our military because our elites don't know who they are. But also we talked about the other side, which is that people lose the benefit that you and I saw from being attached to military service. We lose the benefit of that love and connection to our country, which means all of the people in it, and we don't carve them up into tribes. And the kind of personal and moral growth is being lost by people. So we saw it both in terms of the deficit for the military, but also the deficit for the civilians.
Yeah, and this feeling of skin in the game. I mean, you know, when your husband or my son was sent to war, this was not unrelated to the deepest feelings and yearnings of our heart and our family and your children, my other kids, and so forth and so on. In other words, we were lamenting the fact that often the view of American war and diplomacy is so politicized along party lines or left and right that people forget that these guys, these women in the military represent all of us, whether we like it or not, or whether we like the president who just sent them to war. I mean, both, you know, you had worked for the Clintons, you know, and George Bush was deploying your husband. But hey, just because you may or may not have voted for George Bush, nevertheless, being the commander in chief, we're stuck with what he did. And I guess one of the points we were making is if everybody had more investment and accountability and skin in the game, there would actually be less wars because it wouldn't be so easy to be sending other people and another class, which you just said about, you know, the people making the decisions were not representing the military. That I think was a thread that ran through the book. 100%.
So it was great to write with you, Frank, because you're a great, like, taskmaster. You know, we would write, you know, a page or two, send it back and forth. When it was my turn, you'd be like, where's the pages? Where's the pages? You know, so I had my 4-year-old, my 3-year-old and my 7-year-old, but I had Frank, I need to get those pages back. So Charlie, you're going down for the nap. I got to send those pages back to Frank. You kept us really on track. We wrote that book in 7 to 9 months, really fast turnaround. And the sad thing is, if you remember, our publisher, HarperCollins Books, they were like, we got to get this book out because the war is going to be over. We got to get We got to get this book out.
War, it's all that there'll be no more wars, so nobody will be interested. So the pub date was what, 15 years ago?
Yeah, exactly.
And 15 years later, Joe Biden finally, against great opposition, you know, ends the war. We could have done 10 more books in that time.
I know. But this book really, you know, set the preconditions for this organization that I founded, Blue Star Families, which is now the largest organization supporting military and veteran families. We have over 1 million people use the programs and resources every year. It was it seeks to create a bridge between people in our communities and people they serve. And, you know, us having, you know, gotten together and done this work laid the groundwork that made that change possible.
Yeah, and for which I'm eternally grateful, because I think the work you do, obviously, having been a Marine parent myself, you know, no one has to explain to me what you're doing or why it's so important. So I'm going to ask you, as if you were just an ordinary guest here and I didn't know so much about you, how a couple of things happened. First of all, we've heard about a little bit about the transition of you from the Clinton White House. You marry a Marine who's the pilot of Marine One. I can remember visiting him on a base where he was also in charge of the development of the Osprey program. For those of you who can't remember the Osprey, just look it up. It's the airplane that has the wings that tilt and can take off like a helicopter but land like a plane. It was in development. So I'd ask you, you know, how's your husband doing? What's he doing? And once we went to the base and he let you and me sit in the simulator and just see what it was like when the plane was just being rolled out, as I remember. That was a memorable afternoon.
That was fun. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. I think you did pretty well, and I think I crashed it.
Yeah, okay. Well, I got to watch you crash it. Did he, can I just catch up on your family a little bit? The kids are grown up now. Where is everybody?
Yeah, kids are grown up now. You visited us in London. You remember that?
I do.
That was
I think I slept
super
on a
fun.
couch. We were,
Yeah,
why was I in London, by the way? What we were doing?
I
Something to
think
do with the book?
no, I think you might have been maybe, I can't remember what brought you to London. I don't know if you were stopping through visiting your daughter at that
Yeah, I
point.
don't know. I forget, but you were
Yeah.
just sort of nice and let me sleep there for a
Oh, yeah,
couple
we're
of days.
thrilled to see you. So the kids, Sophie's a senior at University of Chicago, where your son John went. So
What's she
we
studying?
think that she went in as a math major and a theater minor. She's graduating as a theater major and a math minor.
Good for her.
Good for her. Yeah, it
And,
took her a
doing
long
well,
time.
happy, like the school?
She's happy. She likes the school. There were certainly times that was not the case, but as we get to the finish line here, everything's much better. Going to college during the time of COVID is not something that you and I would wish on anybody.
Yeah.
Charlie's a freshman at NYU in the liberal studies program, thinking about doing philosophy. So
Do your kids only go to schools my children went to?
exactly, exactly. That's what I was going to say. That's the theme.
Yeah.
It was a pretty good model, Frank.
And what's he studying?
He's in the liberal studies program, so
Okay.
he's thinking about doing philosophy.
Good for him.
But he's
And is
playing
he
a lot of
Does
guitar.
he like NYU?
He loves NYU. He's playing a lot of guitar. He's writing articles and fiction, and yeah,
That's
It's-
great. And is he living on campus, I guess?
living right on Washington Square Park, which is like
Yeah, I know right where he is. I walk by there all the time.
yeah. So it's it's a good life for a young person. I'm
Yeah.
happy for them. And Greg retired from the Marine Corps in 2015, and he started a company where he tries to bring in innovative companies into the government, into DoD and the VA, innovative healthcare, innovative
for him.
climate security kinds of stuff. Problems that he saw that he was frustrated with is like, let's make things better. And he's really enjoying it.
Have you ever thought about jumping back into politics?
I think it's such a bad lifestyle, unfortunately, these days.
Yeah.
It's become so bitter.
Yeah.
One of the things that I love about what I do is that you have to really be an asshole to not want to support military.
Yes, that's right.
So I can be friends with Democrats. I can be friends with Republicans. It doesn't matter
Yeah.
who's in office.
Yeah. And left and right aren't going to quibble with you. Hey,
They
we're all for supporting military families. So
So I feel like I can make a difference. I feel like I can
Yes.
give them policies. I feel like I
Yes.
can do what people in politics do,
yes.
but do it without the ugliness.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. But I'm close to this White House, this Department of Defense. I'm close to this VA, and have a lot of friends in politics, and having that background was extremely helpful in doing
Well,
this.
because of all your connections, I know, again, this is not really a very good interview question, but I met Joe Biden once on a train, actually on the way to do something with you. I was going down to Delaware. I forget, okay, this is way out of order, but you and I did a national tour together.
Yeah, it was great.
And I still have some of those plaques from all those Ivy League schools that we visited and spoke to. The nearest I got to any swanky education was going out and speaking with you on the road. But I remember being at Princeton and Yale and the Harvard School of Foreign Service and all this other stuff. But the Kennedy School of Government, that was it, and a whole bunch of other swanky things. So anyway, on one of those trips to do with a media thing, I don't know if we were going to meet somewhere, if I was alone, or we were doing something in Philly. I remember meeting Joe Biden on the Acela or the train, because remember he used to take the train down from DC
Yeah.
back to Delaware
Constantly.
every week or something.
Every
So on
week,
one of
yeah.
those runs, it was like, oh, there's Senator Biden. So I went up and said hi, and of course he was very affable. But I'm just wondering if you would come across him in the course of all your crisscrossing efforts as an advocate for military families, and or before that in the Clinton years.
Oh, yeah. Well, Jill Biden works very closely with us. So she does a lot of things with us. And I saw him on Veterans Day. I was at the White House, and he was in great shape. And it was terrific to see him. He's very connected to the work we do because of his son, Beau.
Yeah.
So going back to when he was vice president, he and Jill were always very involved in Blue Star Families.
Yeah, I can imagine he would be incredibly supportive of you and everything you've stood for. And I guess you and Greg have known him in that capacity. But do you ever miss working in the White House yourself?
I love the White House, and whenever I get to go back there, I love going to it. I do feel like it's people's house and it's got so much history.
Yeah.
I loved it when I worked there. That was before 9/11. So you could just wander around and bring people in and share it. And that was fantastic. You come over for Christmas and you'll see I get the White House Christmas tree ornaments every year. So we fill that up. It's I do love our country very much. I'm very patriotic. And
Yes,
for
I
me,
know.
that's a part of it. That feeling that we choose our leaders and they have the opportunity to do things. And when you get to be part of it and close to it, it's sounds corny, but it's just such a privilege.
I feel the same. And of course, having had a son who's been in harm's way makes you look at our engagements as very personal, not just the ones he's in, but no one has to explain to me all of them after that. And to go back to something you were saying before, I did feel it was such a privilege, during the time when John was deployed, I was just starting to use email, back in the day. It was just coming in. And I can well remember that had it not been for the email and also many letters in those days that I got from other Marine families, that I would have felt very alone. But actually, we in the Marine Corps family tended to reach out to each other. I remember going with you and by myself as well to quite a number of Marine Corps family gatherings.
Yeah.
The saddest of which was Gold Star moms of those who had lost people, then Blue Star moms, those who had had folks wounded or serving in other ways like me. And it was very humbling because we are a class-ridden society. And as a writer, with my swanky friends in the literary business and in the university community in Boston, you forget that irrespective of politics and who's voting for Republicans or who, agrees with you on other issues, that when it comes to support, I've never run into any community like the military family community for really standing up for people who need support. I've never seen or felt anything like that. Even in my involvement in religious groups and the other thing, there's never been that close tie. I don't know if that has been sustained in your life as well.
100%. I mean, it was, one of the reasons I was supportive of us staying in the military, and in the end, Greg served 30 years.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking that's mind-boggling there. I mean, in my head, you're both still 30 years old.
Yeah, God bless you. But the closeness and the trust with the people that you're serving with, and even in the extended world, gives you this safety net, the kind of safety net you're talking about in your book, your latest book, which I think is
speaking of which, I ought to take our old book down.
Yeah, take it down and put the other one up. Yeah, because I think it's a very.
Believe me, I've interviewed. Mine's falling over now. That's a bad sign. I've interviewed a lot of authors, and I never have had anybody else's poster up, but I've kept ours around. It's outside my office as a memento. And honestly, every single day I look at it and think about you and, hey, I wonder how Kathy's doing. So now I'm finding out. Okay.
By the way, I still give our books out all the time to people as gifts in my circle. People, it's still read. People still love it.
Thank you.
It's kind of sad that it hasn't changed, that it's still relevant, but but this, I think a lot of what you talk about here, except for the stay put part, because we don't get the benefit of that in the military.
Yeah, but you stay put in your own way. And that is, Greg stuck with the Marine Corps. You stuck with him. You stuck with your commitment as a wife and a family. And military home is movable. But if you're staying in that service, that home moves with you.
That's very interesting.
That's not change. I'm talking about people who have all their family, say here in New England, and they move to California as a startup because there's a little more money, little more prestige. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about stay put geographically. I'm talking about sticking with your commitment and a life pattern that you don't just throw away for the next big job and career opportunity.
And we have some of this, we have some of the safety net in the military, especially if you have the privilege of living on base, which fewer and fewer people do. 70% now have to live on base, that you describe in your book that makes it possible. So I largely didn't work after I got married, because we moved 9 times in 16 years. And again, it was before remote work and internet stuff was possible. But that meant that I was with my kids. And even when I was working, like doing some contracting or writing the book with you, my neighborhood would help me take those kids, take care of those kids. If you and I went away on a book tour, my neighbors would have the kids spend the night, while I went, and then come back. And we had healthcare, because that's what you have in the military. You get the subsidized healthcare. We had that housing subsidized. So there was, it allowed the kind of life that you're describing that I think is possible for kids to have that experience.
Well, and one ironic thing that would come up sometimes, I think, in our talks we gave on the university circuit was this sort of strange dichotomy of the way the military actually functions. It showed up 2 sets of people's hypocrisies. On the left, that tended to be a little leery of the military. Here was actually one group in America that operated as a socialist country.
Right,
the
exactly.
US Marine Corps takes care of its people the way Finland and Scandinavian countries do. On the right, they all love the military and they were very gung-ho, and they didn't ever want to mention the fact that the military had programs for its personnel, free healthcare, all kinds of pensions, all kinds of disability pay, et cetera, money for education, all these things that are, quote, from the left, which if it was a country would get it branded as a socialist country. In other words,
100%.
From the left and right, the military presented something they didn't want. And here we go again with the whole green issue. The military is greener than the culture is. So the military is the greenest part of American society. The left doesn't talk about that. The right doesn't want to know because it shows them up. So I think the military is an interesting lens through which we really have to look at things. And I still feel that way.
And I think it gives us an opportunity beyond this partisan divide that we have to say, look, we actually have a model that everyone does buy into.
Yes.
We don't have to hate each other about these ideas.
We don't have to hate each other. Hey, let me interrupt a minute and just say this is In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer. I'm Frank Schaeffer. I'm talking to one of my very old friends, Kathy Roth-Douquet, who wrote a book with me, AWOL, 15 years ago or so. Then we toured the country and had dozens of speaking engagements together. I can remember the first big TV media break we got. We did the Today Show together one morning.
Yeah. With
that was a little nerve-wracking because we didn't have a lead up. I think it was our first media appearance. It wasn't like, okay, we'll start with a couple local radio programs and then work up from there. No, you're booked on the Today Show. So you came from somewhere, I came from somewhere. We walked into the studio and we did our thing.
Yeah. And not much prep. I feel like, I'm more prepared for that now.
Yeah. Well, let's call them up and ask them, see if we can get a do-over. But I think we did okay. I remember we did okay.
I think we did okay. We got good results. And so, Senator Obama's staff had heard about our book and read about it.
I remember that. Had
me come in and speak to them about it. And then when he was running for president, they asked if I could help with connecting them to military families.
Yeah.
And Michelle Obama started, she was interested in juggler families. She started meeting military families and really got captured by their experiences. And that really was one of the things that led to her starting the whole Joining Forces initiative.
Have you and Michelle Obama and Jill Biden, Dr. Jill Biden, ever worked together on any project other than just informally that they are people you know and have worked with and been your friends?
I think.
I mean, like, are they on your board or do you meet with them or how have they helped you?
They helped me a tremendous amount, certainly with growing Blue Star families during the Obama administration. So they always included me in the events they did. Our Blue Star Museums program, which I think, is close to your heart, Frank. We have, working with the NEA, we have 2,000 museums across the country that make themselves free to military families over the summer. They were both the honorary chairs of that the entire time they were in office. And now that Dr. Biden is back, she's the honorary chair of it again.
That's great.
So that's a really lovely one.
That's really great. And, I don't know them the way you do, but it seems amazing to me that my friend, Kathy Roth-Douquet, has been friends with and quite close to let's see, 3 first ladies, not to mention the presidents, because of course you worked with the Clintons and you know Hillary very well because you all traveled together because you did the travel stuff. By the way, was Greg on those planes with you when you were flying around in Air Force One? Was he on those trips, or did they bring Marine One?
They would bring Marine One. So he wouldn't be on Air Force One, but if we, for Marine One, he would bring the helicopter.
But you were on Air Force One.
I was on Air Force One, and then usually I was not on Marine One, but I would be in a trailing helicopter because only 15 people can be in Marine One. So, that'd usually be the family and the chief of staff and the guy with the football. But we would be on trips together. So that's how we met each other in the Philippines. We met at a ball at the U.S. Embassy in the Philippines because we were both doing a presidential trip there. Karen Pence, I should mention, we worked with Karen Pence a lot during the Trump administration. And
so during the Trump administration?
During the Trump administration.
So and what was Karen like? Was she a nice lady?
Lovely person. And really cared a lot about spouse employment, did a lot of work with us on that. She also was, when she was in office, was the honorary chair for Blue Star Museums. And we went to Hawaii together and spoke about those issues there. And their son is currently serving Marine with a family.
Good for him.
So
is he an officer? Is he enlisted?
He's an officer. Yeah.
And you don't happen to know what his MOS is, do you? What's he do?
I don't recall his MOS.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just curious. So that basically with you and Karen Pence and Michelle Obama and Joe Biden and Hillary, has Hillary been, okay, of course she has been, but how have the Clintons been involved? Because I remember something interesting, little footnote here that you'll appreciate. When I published Keeping Faith, this is before you and I met, okay? Because you gave me a kind of more of a connection to the Clintons, but I, as you know, transitioned from my evangelical right-wing background to a much more liberal progressive point of view. But if you roll back and roll back and roll back and roll back, the Clintons were, caught the tail end of my right-wing activism. So that, these were not people that I was automatically friendly towards or disposed to in any way. And I can remember when Keeping Faith came out, Barbara Bush wrote to me, and then her husband, Bush Sr., wrote to me, handwritten notes, very nice, saying how much they liked it. And then Laura Bush read a passage from my book, but in the form of an op-ed I had written for the Washington Post on Meet the Press. And so that, of course, my publisher had not printed enough hardcover copies. It went to #1 on Amazon for about 10 seconds and then was gone for months, because it wasn't like now where it's instant and paperbacks come out and so forth and so on. Anyway, long story short, Bill Clinton wrote me a nice handwritten note on a nice big card, but this was from his office in New York City when they relocated there. Remember, he had an office?
Yep.
And Hillary was either just running for the Senate or whatever. Anyway, I got a lovely note for him. And to this day, I am so chagrined because I thought, I'm not answering this. Can you imagine the stupidity? Talk about, an asshole for Jesus. That was me at that point. I mean, come on, you should never do that to anybody. He took the trouble to read the book and write me a note. I never answered him because he hadn't been one of our kind of people. So what kind of a jerk was that? So that goes to show you how far I've traveled, because that's certainly not me anymore. And after I met you, it was like, you shameful idiot. How could you? Kathy was part of that White House, and now she's one of your best friends.
Yeah, but they were, both super supportive of it. When in the Clinton Foundation, we did some work with them, with Blue Star Families, trying to measure some of the impact of some of our programs. And they were a Clinton Global Initiative too. We partnered with some other groups to try to get people hiring more veterans, hiring more military spouses. And a lot of those programs, they had a very big impact. So if you can work together, you can work, in coalition, you can often really move things that otherwise. When
you look at the kind of backwash from the Trump years and the way that we have, when you and I were on the road, we used to talk about how sad it was that America was so divided. I mean, it would have been more unified. I mean, But anyway, fast forward to the present tense here. We pulled out of Afghanistan. We've gone through the Trump years. I often think of the military family in terms of, and I'm not asking you for anything you don't want to say here, but I'm just wondering, between you and Greg, has the last passage of those years and the divisions and all the rest of it kind of been demoralizing to the military, or is it still something, if I dipped into a Marine Corps birthday ball and spoke there, would my conversations with Marines be kind of the way they were 20 years ago, or would I find a totally different universe now?
No, I think that if you came into a Marine Corps ball, or one of those settings, I think you'd still find the motivation. I think we're still able to tap into reservoirs of optimism and commitment and idealism. Especially the Marine Corps, because the Marine Corps is very good at inculcating that.
Yes.
I do think that we have to fight for it. It's not easy, and we have to keep telling the stories around fighting for it. We as a community know that we have to care about each other regardless of our religion, our race, our politics, or whatever, because we know we're not safe if we don't. But It's hard to be in a larger context that doesn't behave that way and doesn't feel that way. And I think we do feel that we need to move the country back from where we are.
I mean, if you and I were writing a book today, when we wrote AWOL, the disconnect of the military to the civilian population was sort of one of ignorance and not caring, but not caring, just more out of sight, out of mind. We don't know anybody in the military. Today, I wonder if we would have to do a chapter on the ideological disconnect that take the Marine Corps. This is a group of American citizens who are trying to all work together for the common good when everybody else has decided we live in two countries and we're getting editorials in the papers of record, wondering whether we're going to have a civil war or not. How do you be a motivated military in the light of a country in which civilians are talking about fighting each other for real, and elections are being, reputedly stolen, or people are claiming that our democracy is waning? At a certain point, I wonder how that changes the relationship with not just the men and women in the military, but say Blue Star families, in your support of military families. They're trying to be something that no one else in the country still is actually trying to be, which is present a united front as Americans.
Right. I mean, if we were writing that book today, we might say the best way you could support the military is by being a better neighbor in your own community to the people across town from you.
Yeah, who you don't agree with on other issues. Find some common ground.
Yeah, the best way to support the military is to be a better American with neighbors who don't look like you and don't think like you.
Yeah, so
I think there's a lot to that, Frank.
Yeah, I do too. Hey, you know what, Kathy? If you're bored next year,
let's call up Jen.
Are you up for another national tour?
Exactly.
I think we might.
In many ways, it really was what our second book was about too. How free people move mountains. We have to care about each other more than we care about our self-expression.
Yeah, I think so too. And in a way, that book was a little ahead of its time, because in a way, that book is more apropos now than when we wrote it.
Really true. I mean, maybe we could revise it, give it a different title, and resell it.
We could revisit that.
Yeah, I think so. But to me, it's a through line with this book. Mm-hmm. It is not a love, from fall in love, have children, stay put, save the planet, be happy. It's really the same topic.
Now, have you read the book? Are you reading it?
Yes. No, I've finished it.
Because I got a note from you saying you liked it, but I just, let's do a little more of this.
Let's do it. When I wrote you the book, I was about a third of the way through.
Yeah.
And now I have finished it. And I love the book. I love the prescriptions. I think that I think it's very important. I read some of it to my 19-year-old who really liked it. One of the things that he really liked was the idea that we should teach in high schools and colleges about how to make relationships strong, rather than treat them as something that is interfering with the things that you should be doing.
The quote, important stuff.
The important stuff. Yeah.
And as you get older and closer to my age, suddenly you realize was never the important stuff anyway. You were deluded because, yeah, we all have to have jobs and careers, but you get to my point, and I'm doing childcare for my grandchildren, and I try to, think about things that were important to me in the past. I mean, if two lines were forming, I always know which one I would be in.
Yeah. I think also the fact that we live very long means that you have a lot of time to have that brilliant career. And you make that point in the book. I think it's a real opportunity for individuals, for families, and for policymakers to really think about what that means. And the really excellent points you make about fertility, but also grandparents. Yeah. I had my kid, Sophie, I was 33 when I had Sophie. So I'm 57, she's graduating from college. If I'm lucky, I'll be your age when I have my first grandchild. Yeah. Right.
But you'll still look like you're 12. So I think you're okay.
But when we think there is plenty of time, like I took 16-year pause or something in my career. I had a very brilliant career, was making twice as much as my husband when we got married, worked not only for the President of the United States, I worked for a billionaire, and then came off the track, to be a military spouse and raise children while my husband was deployed, and we moved 9 times in 16 years. But then I came back, and I'm, Blue Star Family's worth $10 million annual organization now. We have, I don't think I would have had I would be in a place that I was, more prominent or more gratified had I not interrupted my my In other words,
my daughter,
I think the cost to me was zero. Yeah, your daughter Jessica.
But go ahead, I interrupted you.
No. But I think the Jessica point is right to the point. I mean, I think that one's even better. Tell the story in case people haven't read.
Well, it's in the book, and I quote her. Jessica, working backwards now as a CEO of a company in New York that both researches and sells new green technology globally. Before that, she was the chief lobbyist for 50 European energy companies to the European Union, and would put her cell phone up on the podium when she would speak in the General Assembly there and turn it around so her proud daddy sitting here in America looking at her on his phone could see what she was doing. What did she do? She dropped out of NYU. I mean, not saying this is a plan, and she married a Finnish jazz composer, a guy that scores movies, Donnie Stromback, wonderful guy. They're still married, very happy. Had her kids young, went back to school, speaking of cycles of life being longer than we think, got her degree at the University of Finland in Swedish, having learned fluent in the Swedish part of Finland, which is Finnish speaking and Swedish speaking, like many European countries, 2 languages. Got a job as an intern with a company from a professor who was from the UK, happened to be a guest professor for a semester, gave her a job as an intern in a company. Within 5 years, she had bought him out and owned the company, had offices in Europe and for this lobbying group, moved back to the States for an investment company, became within 5 years was the CEO of that company, having raised her kids through school age in Finland. So all I'm trying to say is not, hey, here's what everybody ought to do, but she did the things that everybody's, quote, supposed to do, but she did it in an order that took account of her fertility. So, no IVF necessary, the way Michelle Obama talks about in her public stuff, where she warns people to pay attention to their fertility clocks if they ever want to have children. She's one of the people that's very honest about that in view of her own history. So anyway, I use that as an example, but here's my point. Jessica has a thing that I quote in the book where she's saying, until COVID came along, women like me were hiding the fact we even had families, because everything was so career-oriented that you wouldn't even tell the truth if you were on a way to see your children or something. You would say, oh, no, I'm at the office or something, as if somehow these are 2 separate things and you couldn't be taken seriously as a woman if you admitted that family concerns and other kinds of attachments even intruded into your career. And then, of course, there are these guys like Pete Buttigieg who get mocked for taking a little time with his kids, right, on the same right-wing media that at 2 minutes later is talking about family values. So anyway, that's a lot on the table, but just react to some of that.
Yeah, I think, actually, the story about your daughter, Jessica, is one I want to share with my daughter who's graduating from college now, is that you have plenty of time to have your career. You don't necessarily have plenty of time to develop your capacity to love and to pair bond and to, have all those other kinds of things. So when, not everyone is as blessed to have been raised by parents who love them in a stable situation and been given the tools to be able to graduate college. Only 35% of people graduate from college. If you're one of those who can do that,
Yeah.
your future's fine. One way or another, you're going to find a way to support
Yeah.
yourself and make a living. So you
Yeah,
don't
and
have
if you
to
want to
be
take
so
a couple
scared.
years out as a male or female or non-binary person, whomever,
Yeah.
and put the loving relationships of your life first, maybe earn a little less, scratch along for a while, raise some children, you're going to be able to come back and have a career. It's total nonsense saying
Yes.
one or the other. I mean, that's just crazy.
It's just not one or the other. But as you say in the book, it's not all at the same time, but it doesn't
No.
need to be all at the same time,
No.
because you're going to live long enough. And if you don't, you won't know the difference.
Well, the sad thing that I talk about in the book, and that I think, you're a good person to say this to, and maybe it's why you like the book, is that, our culture has a very weird and backward idea of how to define the word success. We define it always in career and money and position terms and status. And of course, that's the last thing that in the end defines who we are or gives us joy. It's always the quality of our personal relationships. I mean, otherwise your whole life is crap. And we all know that. In other words, it doesn't matter how much money you have in the bank if you can't get on with people who are closest to you and make that work. So you and I have both kind of lived lives that have put our money where our mouth is on that front. I guess that's why one reason you respond to the book.
Yeah, I remember when I married my husband, we moved to Okinawa, and I got off that super high career track I had been on. And, people who had been very close friends of mine didn't answer my emails anymore, because I was someone who could do a lot for people. I was close to a lot of powerful people. And then I was, married to a mid-grade Marine Corps officer, and that had zero status. So that was shocking for me, but I had to spend some time thinking about how valuable is that? And at the end of the day, it's just not valuable. And not something to worry about, and to realize that you gotta understand what your values are and live.
Well, and I'm sure that experience is actually far more useful to you as the co-founder and CEO of Blue Star Families than a lot of your quote, your fancy college degrees, which I'm not disparaging, a little jealous,
Right.
not disparaging. But my daughter Jessica, to go back to her for a minute, says one of the things that ticks her off is that when people ask her, how did you become a CEO of this company? And before you were 50, and how did all this happen? All this sort of glass ceiling smashing technique. She says, well, actually, it had nothing to do with formal education or work experience. Basically, where I learned to manage things as I manage them as being a mother of two children.
Right.
And they don't want to hear that she says people shuffle around, look at their feet. It's certainly not what the young women think is the case, having come out of the high-powered college career track. The men don't quite know what to do with it. She says, but it's changed because post-COVID lockdowns, there were so many people basically given a time out as adults, told to sit in their room for a year and think about life, who then experienced much more hands-on collaborative relationship with their partners or spouses or children, that at this point she feels that it's almost a new day, or not necessarily that everything will change, but that there's some hope that people will see life more in its entirety and less in these kind of weird watertight compartments. I don't know how you think about that.
I think we're all role models, and if we can live with conviction the way we think is right, people are very happy to see it.
Yeah.
So, I always took my kids to meetings. Go do a meeting at the White House, and I'd bring my little kid and my son and sit him down on the ground and have him color while I spoke. And I didn't feel, my husband was deployed and we didn't have a lot of money, and this is how I was going to do stuff. And my kids were well behaved. And I felt like, let's just show what right looks like for how we make things work for real live people. I think it's, people want that. People want what you are saying because they're not hearing it. And it just takes people saying it. Good for your daughter for saying being a mom.
Yes, she does.
has that value. And then another thing I would say is, I had a terrific honor this past year. I was selected to be a trustee of Princeton University.
I was going to ask you about that. And I even got a note here saying, ask about this new thing. So tell us about it.
Yeah. And I just say, to me, that has a lot of currency because that's a great elite institution. My grandparents were immigrants. They had to interrupt their education to flee persecution. And then 2 generations later, their grandchild is a trustee. Well, if I had stuck with my regular career, I think it's very unlikely I ever would have ended
Sure.
up with that. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is you're not actually giving anything up.
Mm.
You can even get those shiny prizes that maybe you were, avaricious for as a young person, but not have to stay on the treadmill to do it if you go by your convictions. When I started Blue Star Families, when I first went into international affairs and all the thing I got my degree in, the sexy stuff, of course, is international negotiations, nuclear weapon policy, this, that, and the other thing, international trade. Military families, is that a prestigious thing to work on?
Right.
Well, but the truth is, it's what I had the ability to really make a difference for, and was to be very fulfilling. And it's the thing, sometimes it's the thing that, pardon the expression, the thing that God puts in front of you that is, your plot to till. And it doesn't mean that you're giving up any of those things that you ever thought you wanted. It means that, I think, as you were saying, there's nothing wrong with getting rich, but it can't be your goal. Your goal is to create the beautiful, product. If it turns out to make you rich, there's nothing wrong with that. But that's not what you were trying to do. You were trying to do the thing that had the value to you.
Yeah. So anyway, this is Frank Schaeffer in Conversation with Frank Schaeffer. By the way, for anybody who wants to get in touch with Kathy or find out more about Blue Star Families or how they can be a part of it, or get Kathy and my 2 books we wrote together, all that good stuff. We're going to, everywhere we post this, on my Facebook page and YouTube, and when it goes up as a podcast, my wonderful producer, Ernie, without whom I cannot do anything, will be putting all the links to everything Kathy Roth-Douquet. So that's going to be with this everywhere. So Kathy, let me ask you a question. That we might have discussed sitting together on an airplane on the way to a speaking event. By the way, Princeton's where you're a trustee, right?
Yes, right.
So if we ever do a book together, we can get invited there to speak at least.
100%.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, the rest of our Ivy League tour may fall to pieces, but we can get there. Okay, I'll note that. That'll be the deal. So I have a question for you. What do you, I don't know sometimes whether to be an optimist, because I see Joe Biden doing some great things. I know that post-COVID, people are rethinking family commitments in a good way, quitting jobs that don't pay. There's all sorts of challenges and threats to our democracy looming. I just want to ask you something. Where do you see the difference between what I'll call the usual American hysteria, where reasonable anti-communism turns into McCarthyism, where, we always seem to be able to take things to this kind of hysterical edge where the world is ending and the sky is falling. Is the world ending and the sky falling for American democracy, or are we going to muddle through again? And I really want your real opinion within the parameters of which you feel comfortable saying. I'm genuinely, sincerely want to know what you think.
Yeah, I think we're going to muddle through. I think one of the reasons is voices like yours, Frank. I think that this message that you're talking about, fall in love, have children, stay put, save the planet, and be happy, that gets us through. That's really not that different than what the founders had in mind either. So we just need to have those countervailing voices. The people who are being pulled apart by social media and by this tribalism that we have, they need to hear other things in addition to. I mean, and then we, there's really practical policy too about dismantling some of the power that these social media companies have to feed us divisive stuff. But there's so much goodwill in America still. When there is disaster, there are so many strangers who show up to help people. This synagogue shooting that just happened, terribly sad, terribly upsetting. But it makes me think also of when we had the Tree of Life shooting. Yeah. And I went to my local synagogue afterwards. That my synagogue had a community meeting to allow everyone in McLean, Virginia, the little village that I live in outside of DC, to come and show support for the local Jewish community.
Mm.
We had so many. The synagogue was overflowed. The worship room, the secondary worship room, the social halls, the children's classrooms, the outside spaces. There were so many people showed up to express love and support that the physical space was overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we have to remember. That is America too.
Mm.
And we have the ability to elevate it, but the fight's important. And I think a lot of the policy, solutions you point to are part of how we get there.
Yeah, and I think the general loneliness epidemic in our culture is as serious as COVID, in the sense that, if you just stop for a minute and say, well, how's it all working out for you guys? If you were from somewhere else, the honest answer is not so well. When we lose the sight of family commitment, when we lose sight of bonding and becoming a community of two, first in bonded relationship, whether that's gay or straight or whatever it may be, we've given up all the good stuff. We've eaten the wrapper and thrown away the candy. And I think that's happening across the board so much that beyond the politics, what I'd like to see both the left and the right address more is what I would call just the human condition and the devolution of that. Forget who's in the White House for a minute, or whether you're, identified with identity politics or Black Lives Matter, whatever. There's an even more fundamental question. And that is, as a human being, are you finding joy in your life? And how do you find that? And until we kind of address that, and I hope, and I applaud Biden for some of his policies on spending, for instance, that do address some child care issues and other things. That's a move in the right direction.
Build back better. So important. The safety net. I mean, we lived in Germany for 3 years, and in 3 years, there's no stigma about being poor, because even if you're poor, you have a safe place to live and you have healthcare. Yes. And it turns out if you have a safe and clean place to live in healthcare, then you might say, you know what, I just want to be an artisan and work 20 hours a week, and I'll make enough to put food on the table and take my walks. And I'm happy with that. And there's no downside. And that's society there. Here, we're very, very afraid. We're very afraid I'm afraid to not have enough money. So God forbid, should, one of my children need a lot of medical care, or we live very long. We're afraid that something terrible will happen. So this drive to earn money is more about personal safety than it is for greed. And so that we could create that safety net so that, guess what? Imagine if everyone could have a clean, safe place to live. It doesn't have to be a palace, just clean and safe.
Yes.
Clean and safe. And healthcare, it would change everything.
Yeah, I totally agree. And why we cannot get the better elements on the conservative side of things and on the liberal side of things to agree on something basic like that, in the same way that your military families agreed to bond and stick together and do the work of Blue Star families with you, irrespective of who they voted for. I just wish I could find the magic ingredient for making that translate into the wider culture. Any ideas on that aspect of things when we close out? I mean, what's the final pitch to people?
The final pitch is to get people to lobby whoever your congressman or representative is let's start with the Build Back Better bill, because it has a lot of childcare support in there. We really do need to get up the social safety net. I'm a big proponent of minimum basic income. What do you think about that, Frank?
I totally agree with you. And paid family leave and a couple of other things would just make a huge difference to individuals.
Yes. Let's start with some of these things and just be very tactical. Because I think so much change will fall from it. I also like your teach relationships in high school and college. Yes,
well, which your son picked up on. So Kathy, listen, let's do something again sometime before we both die.
Yes.
And get too old to do anything. Keep me posted on what you're doing. Thank you for spreading the word on my book. And one of these days, if in one of your things you're doing, we can do a little reunion and do some speaking together. It would be fun to do a panel together again.
Yeah, let's find a way to do that. And thank you so much for having me on your podcast.
Well, it's my pleasure. I'm glad I have a podcast so we could do this. I mean, when else have we gotten to talk this much for a while?
Yeah. No, we'll find another good venue for it.
Yeah, well, give my best to Greg. Say hi to your kids. And let's make sure we keep talking a little bit, because I'm so interested in what you're doing.
Wonderful. Thank you. And
Thanks. And
likewise.
anybody watching this, as I said, In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer, wants to get in touch with Kathy. We're going to put links everywhere. I'm Frank Schaeffer. My new book is Fall in Love, Have Children, Stay Put, Save the Planet, Be Happy, in bookstores everywhere, or at least in the one bookstore that stocked it, or on Amazon. And please let me know if you've read the book and want to respond to it, what you think. I do answer questions on my email, easy to reach, easy to get to. And thank you, Ernie, my producer, for putting this all together today. Kathy, this has been a real pleasure.
Thank you.